I never thought I'd be the one to blow up a family. The look on Rebecca's face when Pastor Mike revealed the truth about the honor bench god. I can still see it. Her perfect mascara couldn't hide the shock, the shame. Everyone in that church basement fell so silent you could hear the old heating system tick. 3 generations of a family shattered because I couldn't keep my mouth shut about what I saw. Sometimes I wonder if silence would have been kinder. But then I remember Eleanor's tears. And I know some truths need to be spoken, no matter the cost. The moment is burned into my memory. Rebecca's manicured finger jabbing the air, her voice cutting through the potluck chatter. You don't belong here anymore. Nobody wants you here. And Eleanor sweet, Eleanor with her homemade apple cobbler still warm in her hands, just crumpling before my eyes. I still wake up hearing the sound of that glass dish shattering on the church basement floor. 78 years of dignity, reduced to shards and filling. Who gives anyone the right to do that to another human being, let alone their husband's mother? I should back up. You probably think I'm some busybody who loves drama. I'm not. For 43 years, I've been Martha Reynolds, the quiet one, at First Community Church of Pine Creek, the one who arranges the flowers, who remembers everyone's birthdays, who bakes the communion bread every third Sunday. My husband Frank used to joke that I was the church's secret backbone. Before cancer took him 6 years ago. After that, the church became more than my community, it became my lifeline. These people were my family when I had none left, which is why what happened cut so deep. Because when you see your family hurting each other, you can't just look away, can you? Eleanor Wilson joined our congregation 32 years ago, back when her husband Charles was still alive. I remember the day they walked in her with that cloud of silver hair, him with his military posture. They sat in the third pew from the back, always right side, every Sunday like clockwork. When Charles died 12 years ago, Eleanor kept coming, same pew, though you could see the empty space beside her like a physical thing. Their son Michael had moved away for college and then worked, but when he married Rebecca and moved back to Pine Creek 8 years ago, it seemed like Eleanor's world brightened again. I'll never forget how she beamed when she first brought them to church, introducing Rebecca as the daughter I never had. If only she'd known then what that daughter would become. At first, everything seemed picture perfect. Rebecca was charming, beautiful, involved in everything. She joined the worship team with her lovely voice, volunteered for the charity committee, hosted Bible studies in their renovated craftsman home. Michael had done well in finance, and they weren't shy about it. Designer clothes, new luxury SUV, lavish Christmas parties. Eleanor seemed swept up in the excitement of it all, especially after the twins were born, Adam and Emma, now 6 years old and the spitting image of their father. I used to watch Eleanor at coffee hour, proudly showing everyone pictures on her flip phone, telling stories about Emma's piano lessons and Adam's Little League games. The change was so gradual that looking back, I'm ashamed I didn't notice sooner. It started about 3 years ago. Eleanor would arrive at church alone more often. Rebecca's not feeling well, or the kids have a play date, she'd explain with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then I began noticing other things, how Eleanor would start to say something at committee meetings, only to have Rebecca smoothly talk over her, how she stopped bringing her famous baked goods to potlucks because Rebecca's trying new recipes, how she moved from her regular pew to sit in the back corner, away from where Michael and Rebecca sat with the twins in the front row. I'll tell you exactly when I knew something was truly wrong. December 16th, 2 years ago, our annual Christmas pageant. Eleanor had hand-sewn costumes for the children's nativity play every year since I could remember. That year, she made these beautiful angel wings for Emma with real feathers and silver trim. I was helping backstage when I overheard Rebecca tell her daughter, "Grandma's wings are a bit old-fashioned, sweetie. I bought you proper ones from the specialty store in Westridge." The look on Eleanor's face as Rebecca handed those plastic store-bought wings to Emmy. Think of it every time I put up my Christmas tree now. "It's not a big deal, Martha," Eleanor told me when I found her in the bathroom dabbing at her eyes. "Rebecca just wants the best for the children. And those wings I made were probably too heavy for little Emma anyway." She smiled that smile that wasn't a smile at all, and I let it go. We all did. That's what haunts me most now. We all saw the little cuts, but none of us wanted to acknowledge the wound that was forming. I'll share something I've never told anyone. I kept those handmade wings, found them discarded in the props box, and took them home. They're still in my cedar chest. I don't know why, I kept them maybe as evidence of something I couldn't yet name. The situation deteriorated over the next year. Eleanor moved out of Michael and Rebecca's guest house into a small apartment across town. I want my independence, she told everyone, but I noticed she didn't have Michael's help with the move, just a couple of high school boys from the youth group. I brought her a housewarming casserole and couldn't help but notice how much smaller her new place was. Just one bedroom, barely enough room for her antique writing desk that had been in her family for generations. Rebecca thought it would fetch a good price at auction, Eleanor confided when she caught me looking at it. But some things aren't for selling. That writing desk would later become important evidence. I'll get to that. For now, just know that I started keeping track of things around that time. Small notes in my prayer journal. March 3rd, Eleanor missed Sunday service after Rebecca told her the time had been changed. April 17th, Michael and Rebecca forgot to pick up Eleanor for the twins' birthday party until it was almost over. May 30th, Eleanor's name mysteriously removed from the prayer chain list she'd coordinated for 15 years. When I asked our church secretary about it, she said Rebecca had told her Eleanor wanted to step back from responsibilities. The secretary looked uncomfortable. Rebecca's our new worship coordinator now, she added, not meeting my eyes. She thought it best. By last fall, Eleanor had gone from being the heart of our little church to nearly invisible. She'd lost weight, stopped coloring her hair, rarely spoke up. The twins still adored her, but their visits became less frequent. I'd see Eleanor sitting alone at coffee hour, pretending to be engrossed in the church bulletin while Rebecca held court across the room, laughing too loudly with the pastor's wife and the younger church members. One Sunday, I sat down next to Eleanor and asked point-blank if everything was all right. Family is complicated, Martha, she said, stirring her coffee endlessly. Michael works so hard, and Rebecca has such high standards for everything. I'm just adjusting to how things are now. She looked over at her grandchildren, who were being shepherded out the door by Rebecca, without even a chance to say goodbye to their grandmother. The important thing is that they're happy, but were they? Michael, once so attentive to his mother, now seemed to look through her. The twins were being raised to value expensive things, and status a far cry from the humble values Eleanor and Charles had instilled in their son and Rebecca. I began to see beyond the perfect facade to the calculation underneath, how she befriended people with influence, how she used her position in the church to elevate her family's status in our small town. She was building something, but it required Eleanor to be diminished. The breaking point came on Thanksgiving last year. I was out for a walk to burn off some of my solo turkey dinner when I decided to stop by Eleanor's apartment with a slice of my pumpkin pie. Through her ground floor window, I saw her sitting at her small dining table alone, dressed nicely but eating what looked like a frozen TV dinner. I almost kept walking. It felt too private, too sad, but something made me knock. When she opened the door, she looked startled, then embarrassed. Martha, I thought you'd be with family today. I am now, I said, holding up my pie container. The relief in her eyes nearly broke me. We sat together, sharing pie and stories, and slowly the truth came out. She had been invited to Thanksgiving at Michael and Rebecca's, but when she arrived, Rebecca informed her that the dinner had been moved to Saturday as we told you last week. Eleanor knew no such change had been communicated. I must have misunderstood, she said, but we both knew she hadn't. This wasn't the first miscommunication. Birthday invitations that never arrived, Christmas gifts for the twins that were too educational and quietly disappeared, a family photo wall where pictures of Charles and Eleanor were gradually replaced with glossy portraits of Rebecca's family. I have the voicemail, Eleanor admitted, showing me her phone. Rebecca's message from 3 days earlier, clearly stating Thursday at 2 p.m., but what good would it do to prove it? Michael believes whatever Rebecca tells him, and I won't come between my son and his wife. She looked down at her hands, veined and spotted with age. Sometimes I think it would be easier if I just wasn't here anymore. The way she said it sent a chill through me. I made her promise to call me any time, day or night, if she felt that way again. I left my pie but took with me a growing sense of outrage. This wasn't just family tension. This was cruelty, systematic and deliberate. Over the next few months, I became Eleanor's unofficial advocate. I made sure she had rides to church events. I invited her to my home for coffee and made excuses to check on her regularly. I began to notice how Rebecca would tense up when she saw us together, Once, she cornered me after choir practice. "It's so sweet how you've adopted Eleanor," she said, her voice syrupy but her eyes cold. "Michael and I worry about her becoming dependent on others. Her memory isn't what it used to be, you know." The insinuation was clear. Eleanor was becoming senile, not reliable. But I'd spent enough time with Eleanor to know her mind was sharp as ever. This was gaslighting, pure and simple. The situation reached its boiling point at our church's annual spring potluck, exactly 7 weeks ago today. Eleanor had spent 2 days making her apple cobbler, the recipe Charles had loved, the one she'd passed down from her grandmother. I'd helped her shop for ingredients, watched her measure everything with care, listened as she told stories about making it for church gatherings for 3 decades. The dessert represented more than food. It was her heritage, her connection to the community, her offering. The fellowship hall was crowded that Sunday after service. Eleanor arrived carrying her glass baking dish wrapped in a tea towel to keep it warm. I watched her scan the room, finally spotting Michael and the twins at a table with Rebecca and several church board members. Eleanor smoothed her dress, one she'd clearly chosen with Coran, walked over, cobbler in hand. I couldn't hear the exchange, but I saw Rebecca look up, say something with a tight smile, and gestured dismissively toward the already crowded dessert table. Eleanor hesitated, then moved to walk away. That's when Rebecca reached out, grabbed her arm, and leaned in to speak directly into her ear. Whatever she said made Eleanor freeze. The color drained from her face. And then, with everyone watching but pretending not to, Rebecca stood up and said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "You don't belong here anymore. Nobody wants you here." Eleanor's hands trembled. The glass dish slipped, hitting the floor with a crash that silenced the room. Apple cobbler everywhere. Eleanor standing amid the mess, broken glass at her feet, looking small and lost. Michael, instead of coming to his mother's aid, pulled the twins away from the broken glass, his back to Eleanor, as if he couldn't bear to see her humiliation. I don't remember crossing the room, but suddenly I was there, putting my arm around Eleanor's shaking shoulders. "Let's get you cleaned up," I said, glaring at Rebecca, who was already orchestrating church volunteers to clean up the mess. As I led Eleanor to the bathroom, I heard Rebecca telling everyone, "Poor Eleanor, she gets so confused these days. We've been trying to get her to accept help." The sympathy in her voice made me want to scream. In the bathroom, Eleanor broke down completely. 32 years in this church," she sobbed. "Charles and I were married here. His funeral was here. And now I'm just an embarrassment." That's when I made a decision. If Michael wouldn't stand up for his mother, someone had to. I'll be honest with you, I'm still not sure if what I did next was an act of courage or foolishness. But I couldn't stand by anymore. "Eleanor," I said, holding her trembling hands in mine, "what Rebecca is doing to you isn't right. It has a name, elder abuse." She flinched at the term but didn't deny it. "I've seen it happening, others have too. We've just been too cowardly to confront it." I took a deep breath. "With your permission, I'm going to speak to Pastor Mike." Elder abuse. Such a clinical term for something so personal, so devastating. I'd read about it in an article shared at our senior ministry meeting. Isolation, the gaslighting, the emotional manipulation. It fit Eleanor's situation perfectly. But naming something and proving it are different matters. Eleanor was terrified of losing what little contact she still had with her grandchildren. "Michael will never forgive me if I cause problems with Rebecca," she whispered. I reminded her that she wasn't causing the problems, she was the victim of them. Eventually, she agreed to speak with Pastor Mike, but only if I came with her. We met with him the following Wednesday in his office. Pastor Mike had been with our church for only 3 years, young, idealistic, sometimes a little too eager to please the influential members of his congregation, like Rebecca. I could see his discomfort as Eleanor haltingly told her story. The gradual isolation from family events, the misunderstandings about invitations, Rebecca's control over the twins' time with her, the constant suggestions that Eleanor's memory was failing. I filled in details. She was too kind to mention the public humiliations, the status-seeking behavior, the way Rebecca had systematically pushed Eleanor out of church activities she'd once led. Pastor Mike listened, his expression growing more troubled. "These are serious accusations," he said finally. "Rebecca heads 3 committees, and Michael is our biggest financial supporter. They present such a united front. Are you absolutely certain this isn't just a personality clash or a misunderstanding? I felt Eleanor shrink beside me. Before she could backtrack, I placed my phone on his desk and played the voicemail I'd had Eleanor forward to me. Rebecca clearly inviting Eleanor to Thanksgiving on Thursday, then later claiming she'd said Saturday. Then I showed him text messages I'd documented, Rebecca canceling Eleanor's visits with the twins at the last minute. Eleanor's gentle requests to see family photos that went unanswered. I have 17 incidents documented, I told him, just from the past 4 months. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's a pattern. Pastor Mike looked genuinely shocked. I had no idea, he said. Rebecca always speaks so fondly of Eleanor in public. That was part of the manipulation, of course. Rebecca's public face was flawless, the devoted daughter-in-law, concerned about her aging mother-in-law. It was behind closed doors, or in moments she thought no one important was watching, that the mask slipped. Pastor Mike promised to look into the situation, to speak with Michael and Rebecca privately. Eleanor seemed relieved just to have been heard and believed. I wasn't so optimistic. Sure enough, 3 days later, I received a call from Pastor Mike. He sounded uncomfortable. I spoke with them as gently as possible. He said they were quite upset by the accusations. Rebecca was in tears. Michael suggested that perhaps his mother is experiencing some cognitive decline and misinterpreting things. My blood boiled at the familiar deflection. And the evidence I showed you, I asked. A long pause. Michael said Eleanor has been known to get confused about dates, and Rebecca pointed out that she's taken on many of Eleanor's former church duties out of compassion, not malice. I realized then that Rebecca was too skilled, too connected for a simple pastoral intervention to work. Pastor Mike, well-meaning but conflict-averse, was already retreating to a both-sides position. We need to pray for healing in this family, he concluded. Perhaps a facilitated conversation, but I knew Eleanor couldn't hold her own in a direct confrontation with Rebecca and Michael. She was already too worn down, too afraid of losing her grandchildren completely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Eleanor, alone in her apartment, believing that even her church community had failed to protect her. I thought about those handmade angel wings, discarded and replaced, about the careful documentation I'd been keeping, the pattern so clear to see if anyone bothered to look. And I thought about something Eleanor had mentioned during our meeting with Pastor Mike, how Rebecca had been pressuring her to turn over her late husband's military medals and citations to display in their home, claiming the twins should grow up seeing their grandfather's legacy. Eleanor had refused. One of her few remaining acts of resistance. Those medals go with his Bible to Michael when I'm gone. That's what Charles wanted, she had explained. Not for show, but for remembrance. The next morning, I woke up with purpose and a plan. If the church leadership wouldn't act, maybe the congregation would. Our church had a tradition dating back decades called Testimony Sunday. Once a month, regular members could share brief, personal testimonies during the service. Usually, these were uplifting stories of faith or gratitude. No one had ever used the platform quite like I intended to. I signed up for the coming Sunday, ignoring the flutter of anxiety in my chest. I called Eleanor and asked if she would attend church with me. Rebecca's leading worship, she said hesitantly. She doesn't like it when I'm there on those Sundays. All the more reason, I thought, but didn't say. Instead, I promised to pick Eleanor up myself. When Testimony Sunday arrived, I dressed with unusual Carmichael navy dress, Charles's mother's pearl necklace, actual makeup. I wanted to look credible, put together. Eleanor seemed surprised when she saw me at her door. You look like you're going to battle, not church, she joked weakly. She wasn't wrong. We arrived early, and I deliberately led her to a pew near the front, opposite where Rebecca was setting up with the worship team. I could feel Rebecca's eyes on us, suspicious, good, let her wonder. The service proceeded normally. Pastor Mike seemed slightly nervous when he glanced my way during his sermon, unironically enough honoring our parents. The worship, led by Rebecca's clear soprano, was beautiful as always. Then came the testimony portion. 2 members went before me, sharing brief stories about answered prayers and community support during difficult times. Then Pastor Mike called my name. I squeezed Eleanor's hand and walked to the podium. My prepared notes clutched tightly. I've been a member of this church for 43 years, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. In that time, I've seen how we care for each other through life's joys and sorrows. We pride ourselves on being a family. I looked directly at Rebecca, who was seated now with Michael and the twins in the front row. But I've also seen how we sometimes fail each other, how we can witness harm and say nothing because confrontation feels uncomfortable. A murmur rippled through the congregation. This wasn't the usual uplifting testimony. Pastor Mike shifted in his seat. I continued, carefully avoiding direct accusations, but painting a clear picture. An elderly widow, gradually isolated from family and church community, gaslit about her own experiences, her dignity stripped away by someone who should have honored her. Scripture is clear about our duty to widows and to parents, I said. When we see someone using their position to diminish another person's worth, to separate them from their loved ones, to question their sanity when they resist, we are called to speak truth. The sanctuary was completely silent now. I could see recognition dawning on some faces. They'd witnessed the small humiliations, the gradual erasure. I wonder, I said, looking at Michael now, what Charles Wilson would think if he could see how his wife of 46 years is being treated. If he could see her disinvited from family gatherings, pushed out of church roles she loved, made to feel like a burden rather than the blessing she is. Michael paled visibly. Rebecca's face hardened into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm not sure what Martha is implying, she called out, her voice honey, but my mother-in-law is deeply loved. If she's been feeling isolated, perhaps her memory. That's when Eleanor stood up. I hadn't expected this. In all our discussions, she had been reluctant to confront Rebecca publicly. But now she straightened her shoulders, so like Charles, in that moment, and spoke clearly. My memory is fine, Rebecca. The simple statement, delivered without anger but with unmistakable dignity, silenced Rebecca instantly. Eleanor walked slowly to join me at the podium. I've been afraid to speak up because I didn't want to lose my grandchildren, she said, her voice gaining strength. But they're losing something too, the truth of who their family is, where they came from, the values their grandfather lived by. The tension in the room was electric. Rebecca stood up, pulling the twins close to her sides almost like shields. This is completely inappropriate, she said, looking to Pastor Mike for support, using church as a platform for family disagreements. Michael remained seated, looking stunned, as if seeing the situation clearly for the first time. Pastor Mike rose, clearly intending to diffuse the situation and end the uncomfortable confrontation. That's when something completely unexpected happened. Pastor Mike didn't shut down the discussion, as I'd feared. Instead, he walked slowly to the front and stood beside Eleanor. Actually, he said, his voice thoughtful, this is exactly what church is for. Truth-telling, reconciliation, honoring our elders. He looked directly at Rebecca. I've been pastor here for 3 years, and in that time, I've seen Eleanor's role in this community diminish. I accepted explanations about her stepping back voluntarily, about her health or memory failing. I see now that I was wrong not to question those explanations more carefully. Rebecca's face flushed with anger. You're taking her side based on what? Martha's meddling? Some confused recollections? She turned to the congregation, arms spread wide. My husband and I have given everything to this church. We've hosted events, led committees, contributed generously. She broke off as Pastor Mike raised his hand. Rebecca, he said gently, that's the problem. You've treated the church like something you can buy. But this community was here long before you arrived, built by people like Eleanor and Charles who served quietly, humbly, without recognition. He gestured toward the back of the sanctuary. Do you know what that bench is? Against the back wall. Rebecca looked confused by the apparent non sequitur. Many of us turned to look at the simple wooden bench that had always been there, largely unnoticed. That's the honor bench, Pastor Mike explained. It was built 60 years ago by the founding members of this church. The names carved underneath are those who exemplified true service and humility. He walked back and ran his hand along the underside of the bench. Wilson, Charles, and Eleanor. He read, added 12 years ago, after decades of faithful service. He looked up. I found it last night while praying about this situation. I'd never thought to look underneath before. The revelation hung in the air. Eleanor's name, literally carved into the foundation of our church. Recognition of a legacy that Rebecca had been systematically erasing. Pastor Mike wasn't done. The Bible speaks clearly about honoring parents, about caring for widows, about the sin of pride, but it also speaks about restoration and forgiveness. He looked at Michael now. What will you teach your children by how you treat their grandmother? What legacy are you really building? Michael finally stood, looking shaken. The twins broke free from Rebecca and ran to Eleanor, wrapping their arms around her waist. Grandma, are you on the special bench? Emma asked. Can we see? That innocent question seemed to break something open. Eleanor knelt down and hugged her grandchildren while Michael watched, conflict evident on his face. Rebecca remained standing alone, her carefully constructed image crumbling before our eyes. The confrontation that Sunday ripped open our peaceful church community. Some members sided immediately with Eleanor, sharing their own observations of Rebecca's behavior over the years. Others defended Rebecca and Michael, suggesting I had stirred up unnecessary drama. Pastor Mike called for prayer, for reflection, for reconciliation. But some truths, once spoken, cannot be unheard. The honor bench became a powerful symbol, a physical reminder that worth isn't measured by wealth or influence, but by humble service and integrity. In the weeks that followed, our community experienced what I can only describe as a reckoning. Rebecca stopped attending services, though Michael began bringing the twins every Sunday and sitting with Eleanor in her old pew. I overheard him apologizing to her one day after service, admitting he had been blinded by his own desire for status and success. Dad would be so disappointed in me, he said, his voice breaking. Eleanor just held his hand and forgave him, because that's who she is. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. 3 separate church families came forward with stories of Rebecca's manipulative behavior, credit taken for others' work. Rumors spread to discredit those who opposed her, church resources used for personal gain. The young mother whose children's clothing donation had mysteriously ended up in Rebecca's boutique resale shop. The elderly man whose family Bible Rebecca had borrowed for a display and never returned. The youth group funds that had been redirected to pay for fancy refreshments at Rebecca's committee meetings rather than the planned mission trip. The true extent of Rebecca's scheme became clear when Eleanor finally showed me what she'd been protecting in that antique writing desk. Charles's military records, yes, but also the original deed to the Wilson family home, the same home Michael believed he had bought from an unrelated seller 7 years ago. Rebecca found a buyer who promised to flip it back to them, Eleanor explained. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. That's why I kept these papers safe. The house where Michael had grown up, that Eleanor had reluctantly sold after Charles died, had been acquired through a straw buyer and sold to Michael at an inflated price, a scheme Rebecca had orchestrated to erase the fact that it had been family property. She wanted Michael to think everything good in his life came through her, Eleanor said softly. Not from his past, not from his parents. Rebecca moved out of Pine Creek 6 weeks ago, after Michael filed for separation. He's in therapy now, unraveling the web of manipulation and rebuilding his relationship with his mother. The twins spend every Wednesday afternoon at Eleanor's apartment, baking cookies and looking through old photo albums of their grandfather. Eleanor has resumed her position on the prayer chain and recently taught Emma to make those angel wings for this year's Christmas pageant. She's brought her apple cobbler to the last 2 potlucks. No one lets it drop. As for me, I've been asked to join the church council, though I'm not sure I want the responsibility at my age. But I did agree to help draft a new church policy on elder care and family support. The first draft hangs framed beside the honor bench, which, by the way, now has a small plaque explaining its significance to newcomers. Check on Eleanor regularly, though she needs me less now. Last week, she moved back into Michael's guest house, which he's renovated to give her more independence and comfort. The writing desk sits in her new living room, no longer hiding secrets but displaying family photos, Charles in his uniform, Michael as a boy, the twins at the lake last summer, and a new one, Eleanor and me at her welcome home dinner, gray-haired warriors with matching smiles. Some people in town still think I overstepped, that family matters should remain private. Maybe they're right. But I think of that moment in the church basement, Eleanor's cobbler shattered on the floor, her dignity in Pace's End. I know I'd do it again. Because family isn't just about blood or marriage, it's about who stands beside you when you're broken. It's about who helps you gather the pieces and put them back together. It's about honor, not the kind that demands recognition, but the kind that's carved underneath a simple wooden bench, a testament to lives of quiet service. If you're listening to my story and something about it feels familiar, if you've seen an elderly parent or grandparent gradually isolated, If you've witnessed someone's confidence systematically undermined, if you've felt powerless to intervene, please know you're not alone. Elder abuse thrives in silence and isolation. Speaking up cost me some friendships, brought uncomfortable attention, disrupted our peaceful church community. But silence would have cost Eleanor everything. I still have those handmade angel wings in my cedar chest. Sometimes I take them out and remember how close we came to losing something precious. The smell of cinnamon and apples still makes me think of broken glass and broken trust, but also of healing and justice. I learned that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being terrified and speaking up anyway. It's about recognizing that some benches have names carved underneath, invisible until someone cares enough to look. So I ask you, what would you do if you saw someone being diminished, their history erased, their worth questioned? Would you look away because it's uncomfortable? Or would you be willing to risk disapproval to protect someone who can't protect themselves? I hope you never have to make that choice. But if you do, remember Eleanor standing in that church, finding her voice again. Remember that sometimes the most important truths are the hardest to speak. And remember that you might be the only one willing to look beneath the bench for the names that matter. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found meaning in it, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment if you've witnessed something similar or found your own courage to speak up. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories of everyday people facing impossible choices. And no matter where you are, remember, the honor bench has room for your name too.